Takes a second. Cool. Hey, everybody. Welcome back for our ultimate speaker of the day. I'm really excited to welcome Sharon Kean to the stage. She's currently head of international expansion over at Wise, and she is here to talk to you about your first product manager. So well, we can't hear your applause, but I'm sure we'll clap in your chairs, and I'll turn the stage over to you, Sharon.
Cool. Thanks, Devin. And great to be here. Thanks for the invite. I'm Sharon, and I'm going to talk a little bit about product managers and startups, but specifically for those of you who might be thinking about hiring your first product manager, or maybe in the audience you are a product manager and you're doing this role for the first time. I think this will probably be applicable to both. I'm going to talk a little bit about what works and what doesn't work with product managers and startups. And this is kind of a good follow-on from Kate's talk just now around hiring PMs and specifically what to look for in your first PM hire. So what are the critical skills an early stage startup needs a product manager to excel in? And for those of you who have come across product managers or have experience, you'll see that they generally have a lot of skills. So it's about which ones are particularly important. And I'm going to share 5 things that I've seen work really well, and then 5 things that I'd avoid based on just what I've seen and reflecting a bit on my time in some pretty small startups, but also in being in some bigger organizations as well, where actually the product role is pretty different. But firstly, a quick intro, so a bit of context. Who am I and why am I qualified to talk about this? So as Devin mentioned, currently I head up international expansion at Wise. We've recently changed our name over to Wise. Probably you'll be more familiar with our TransferWise brand. And really this role involves leading around 20 product teams, so it's pretty big scale, and they're spread all around the world, and we're basically taking Wise to those different markets. And for those who aren't familiar with what we do at TransferWise, just quickly, we basically help people send money between currencies, and we try and make it cheaper, more convenient, pretty transparent around fees, and eventually we want to make it free. So that's our mission. And we do that through a basic money transfer service, but also you can get a Wise account and have a debit card and hold money in those currencies. So that's the kind of product that I'm working on at the moment. But before that, I spent a lot of time in early stage startups. So I was the first product manager at a fintech called Zopa, and then also at the e-commerce flower delivery company Bloom Wild, who maybe some of you have heard of. I joined both of those as the first PM. So that's where I've got my sort of opinion from, I guess, in terms of startup product managers. But as I said, I've worked at bigger scale too, and what I'm doing at Wise at the moment is quite different. So having gone through some of the frustrations with those product roles, I think I've formed a fairly reasonable opinion of now what it takes to be a startup PM, but always open to challenge that. And hopefully there's a chance for questions at the end if I say something controversial or something you want to challenge me on or ask me a bit more about. So let's get going. So firstly, I guess if you're a founder and you're in an early stage company, and it's got anything to do with tech and thinking about how to solve customer problems, you've probably got one eye on finding your first PM, or maybe you've done that, or you're looking for some sort of a few others to add to the team. And you're looking for this perfect startup PM. Well, there isn't such a thing, sadly. Or if there is, you'll probably run out of funding before you find them because they are so difficult to tick every box. But there are some qualities that I think make PMs more likely to be successful in early stage companies. And that's really what I'm going to focus on here, because I think that's hopefully what you guys are all about. I've picked up 5 key areas, and I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the things you should ask yourself when you're thinking about hiring this person, or maybe you're doing this role as well. But of course, some of the things that you should ask that PM when you're interviewing them and trying to decide whether you want them to join your mission. So first up on this slide, I'm going to talk about them being an individual contributor, about them owning the details, and about them being pragmatic. And I think those 3 things all sort of fit together fairly well. I'll start with the first one. So looking for a product manager that's an individual contributor, what does that mean? It does depend a bit on the type of product you're building. So one question to think about is is data engineering or design more important to you? Probably all of those things are important, but probably one of them is more important given the product you're making and the phase that your product is in. And how do you figure out whether a product manager has done one of these things, or is any good at one of these things, or is going to be hands-on enough to help you with one of these things? Well, I would suggest asking them about something they've built. And when you start getting into the detail of what they did and what the team did, it usually gives you a really good insight as to what they're passionate about and what they can actually do themselves. Typically if they get quite vague and they start not really knowing the detail, it means they've probably been just managing or outsourcing it to someone else. That may mean that they're not a good fit for you because you're not going to be at the scale where they're outsourcing or managing other people. More specific the answers, the better. Generally, that's a general thing. Usually means that they've done it and they're authentic and they know what to actually do. And really the thing here is about filling the gaps in the smallest teams where everyone's going to be multitasking, including that product manager, and just thinking about what are they actually going to be doing when they're multitasking. There isn't anywhere for them to hide, right? So they what can they not outsource and what do they have to do themselves? Very related, but subtly different. Next bit is around owning the details, and this idea that there's nowhere to hide and there's no one else doing those details. You want to find someone that you can trust with those details, because if they miss them, it means they get missed. It just doesn't get done. I guess like the way, again, I would try and understand this if you're interviewing or meeting someone and trying to assess whether they're going to be able to do this is ask them about something they built again. And then you'll see there's a bit of a theme here. So always ask them about something they've built, because if they haven't built something, then they may not have the skills that you need. And if they understand well enough the steps that it takes to build something, that's a good signal. But even better if they can teach you something along the way, like they teach you a new way to build something you're trying to build, or they make you rethink how you're approaching it, then that's probably even better. And you're probably going to get a bit excited about talking to them. And again, that's a really good sign when you're trying to find someone. I think like there's a lot in this one. I think it's partly about their work ethic, their commitment, their motivation, and they're all things that you might need to help them sort of get inspired about with your mission. But ultimately, I think it's about their curiosity. And if they're curious and they don't leave stones unturned, then that's usually how you find this attribute. And then the final one is being pragmatic rather than polishing stuff. So I think this probably applies to all of them, but I think maybe design is the one that's most easy to visualize here. So you don't want them to get stuck polishing something while something else is catching fire or is not moving as a result. And oftentimes in these very early kind of startups, you're building the very basic sort of nuts and bolts. You're not polishing and optimizing at scale. And you need a PM that is going to firstly like get on board with that and understand it, but also be energized by it and not get frustrated because they feel like they have to leave things half done, or that the product isn't at a level of quality that they're going to be personally satisfied with. It's a pretty common trait, but I think the way to solve this is really ask them again about something they built and figure out what trade-offs they made. And you'll get a sense of, did they get frustrated with those trade-offs, or were they motivated by doing the task at hand and getting the business or the company to move on by building some sort of MVP perhaps. Another way to follow up that question is to ask hypothetically, what would they do if they didn't have constraints, right? So often when you talk to product managers, they'll say, oh, I did this and I did that. And you try and ask them why. And then they're like, oh, because someone told me to, or I didn't have a choice. So it's always good to add on that hypothetical layer of what would they do if they had complete free control. And that's gives you a real insight into like how they think about the world. And if they tell you they're going to, I don't know, if they're going to polish a single screen and they've completely forgotten the point of like launching extra sort of features or use cases for your product, then that can really be quite illuminating. A couple more. And I feel these two group together. It's not just because I ran out of space on the previous slide, but if you've got this bit around like around the detail and around the superpowers, I think there's another element which is a really core PM skill around making good decisions. And I think the reason that's important is it really helps you accelerate. So if you can trust that person to make good calls, you don't need to micromanage them, you don't need to tell them what to do. Even better, they actually start making decisions that amplify and accelerate you beyond what you're able to do yourself as a founder or as a small group of people. And I think there's two things to this. First one is around, can you get shared understanding with this person? Can you quickly get to a consensus with them on anything, like a topic? Is it lunch or like how to make coffee? Even better still, like on how to like build a feature. But often the reason I use an inane example, like can you agree on lunch, is because actually this is about communicating effectively with them. This is different for every PM, and it's really about your personal style and your own sort of approach. And I think you can figure that out within an interview. It's like maybe just figure out a problem to discuss and see whether you can get quick alignment, see whether you get on the same page. If you keep missing each other, it could be a signal that you're not compatible. The other part of it, which is probably far more important, is can they make good decisions at their core? And this is really like the crux of the PM role, in my opinion. Do they think about customer problems, firstly? Because in my mind, if you're going to have a product manager, what you want them to do is get obsessed about your customer, understand them deeply, understand their problems, and then start building the product that is going to solve those problems. So do they start with the customer, or do they start with something else like money or stakeholders? You want them to focus on the customer. And can they use data effectively to understand and qualify those problems that they find? That's qualitative and quantitative. And can they use that to build a conviction that firstly convinces themselves what they should be doing, but then are able to authentically tell that story and convince others? And this is less about getting 100% certainty, and it's more about getting enough certainty that they are convinced themselves, but then can actually convince others because their story is so powerful and so strong. Again, how do you find out about these things? Ask them about something they built. And there's definitely a running theme here. Always ask PMs about something they have actually built. And what product decisions did they make when they were building it is a really good question to ask here. And what impact did those decisions have on customers? And how they got the team to buy into those decisions? Because often if the PM is thinking about this stuff, they're ahead of the game, they're ahead of the team, and the team might be thinking about something else. Apologies if you can hear noise in the background. There's I think an ice cream van outside my house. Yeah, and the final bit is like here, can they convince you is always a good test of this. If they talk about a product they've worked on and they convince you that it was a good idea and that they have built something good, that's a really strong signal. The next bit of this is almost like the complete opposite. So you can look for great PMs, you can look for these great qualities, but how do you really know for sure that this person is going to be a good fit? And how do you not get into this sort of unicorn trap where you're looking for someone that just doesn't exist, or you're looking for someone that's going to take you far too long to find? Worth looking at a few signals that might tell you someone is not a good fit, and that either helps you hurry up and move on from them, or it just really focuses your efforts on these people that you might be a bit unsure about. Sorry, my slide's stuck. So a few signals that are worth paying attention to here. Definitely not exhaustive, and this is probably the more controversial part of the presentation. So if any PMs are listening, I definitely open to a challenge on this. So these are a few things that I've seen in lots of PMs, and sometimes these things really work. They work better at scale, or they work better in certain organizations, but I don't think they are really that effective in startups. So they are strengths. It's not saying that they're bad things. It's just saying that they probably aren't the right things, or they're less helpful in startups. So yeah, I would take it in that kind of in that way, rather than saying, hey, these are bad, avoid. So the first one is around what I would call Agile Expert. So I'm assuming that most people have heard of Agile. It's a framework people use to deliver software. It's very opinionated, very structured, very processy. And you can do qualifications to say that you're an Agile practitioner or a Scrum practitioner. And a lot of PMs get really passionate about this, and they buy into it. They do the course. I've actually done this course. I've got the certificate. So at some point I thought it was valuable. Didn't help me in startups, but these things do have value and they are really useful. But people can get very passionate about them to the point where perhaps those frameworks and those processes take over from common sense. And particularly in a small organization, this can really derail you and get you away from what you're actually doing, like the pragmatic kind of solving customer problem stuff. Probably it's not the right time to be scaling a team and doing processes that are perfect when you've only got 5 people in the room. I think it's just about like the kind of work your PM is going to be doing and focusing on is probably not going to have the highest return on investment in a small stage startup. So if they go heavy on Agile and they sound like they're too opinionated and they're not able to flex that style, it's probably a warning sign, probably best to avoid. Second one is project managers. And this is a really interesting one. Like a lot of project managers become product managers. And a lot of product managers do have this project managing vibe that can be very helpful because it helps you get stuff done. And again, you can get certificates and frameworks and all sorts of things in there with this. But the real point I'm looking to sort of convey here is if you hire a product manager who understands the customer and can help you make decisions and can help you figure out what to build, they're going to be 10x more valuable than someone who will just ship the stuff you tell them to. Might be that you want someone to ship the stuff that you tell them to, in which case hire a project manager, because they'll be really useful to you and they won't challenge you and they won't complain, and you won't have that friction of them trying to be productive as a product person. This is a really interesting one to think about, because you do want some project management skills here. You want people that can get stuff done, but you don't want them to get stuff done to the point where they don't question what they're doing. So that's really my point with this, is like, be clear on whether you want a project manager or a product manager, because they are different. And probably product managers cost a bit more as well. So like, you know, it's a sensible investment strategy if you want to get the product manager value. If you don't, then pay less and get someone that's going to cause you less friction. Third one is around facilitators, and this one's a bit more hard to find. I don't think anyone's going to write that they're a facilitator on their CV. If they do, then you probably should definitely question whether they're a good fit. But this is really around when you talk to them and you ask them about what they see their role as in the team. And if they start saying things like their role is really to enable the team, or like it's to create a culture or to create an environment where things happen, but they don't talk so much about like how they set the course for the team or think about the direction or make decisions, that can indicate that actually maybe they're not a PM, or maybe they're a very junior PM who's not confident making those decisions yet, or there may be a scrum master in disguise. So this speaks back to the sort of agile delivery language, where this role has a place and it is really, really valuable in some organizations, but probably not in a startup, and it's probably not what you want in your startup PM. So get very clear on, like, is this person going to own stuff, and are they going to make decisions? Are they going to help you drive and set the course? Because if they don't, then they're probably not going to be so helpful. Next one. So this is a particularly interesting one, and I would be really clear here to say that this is a super valuable PM skill in certain organizations. So in a bigger organization, so Wise is a good example. I've got 20 product teams in my area. I need to be able to build people and teams to do my job well. And I've built that skill up mainly in the bigger organizations I've worked in, and I get a lot of motivation from it. I also get motivation from building product, and I try and balance the two. But some PMs skew massively to one rather than the other. So if they're very focused on people and building teams, they just might not get so much energy from doing the individual contributor product thinking work themselves anymore. In which case, they're probably not going to be so useful in a tiny startup, because there isn't going to be a team to grow and build. On the other end of the spectrum, if they're very individual contributor focused and they just love building the product so much and they can't cope with people or doing anything with people, they might limit your growth at some point. So it's worth just getting a view of where they are on that spectrum and deciding whether it's going to be the right fit for you. Yeah, like I say, look, I think probably you want them to build the product first in a startup. So it's okay if they're going to be a good people manager, but as long as they're okay with holding on to that and doing it later in 2 years when you've grown and become a unicorn. And then the final one is networkers. And this is not really so much generic PM. It's more generic than specific to PM. Some people are just really good at this. Like, they know someone who can do everything. They, when there's a problem or there's a gap in the team, this person just magically produces someone from their network. Super valuable. But it does mean that they tend to spend more time networking, going to events, speaking at events, and generally just socializing, which probably is going to take them away from some of their time spent building product. Again, a bit of a subtle one, but I would say it's probably not your top priority in a small startup, because the founder typically does this. If you're a founder and you think you're really weak at this and you need someone that's got that, then you should invest in it. But from what I've seen, generally, the founder is the one that will be doing that networking around the business and the brand. They'll have connections just from the nature of what they're doing as an entrepreneur. They'll have built their own network. And often that's how you will then grow out your team. So it's less useful to you to have a PM that spends time on this. And that's it. So there's 5 things there that I think are worth just bearing in mind when you're looking for your right PM. And these might be signals that someone is not right for you in an early stage startup. And then I just thought, I don't know if there's any product managers in the audience, but I thought it'd be good to frame this from their perspective. Personally, having been a product manager in startups, this is sort of my view of the world. And if you're a PM, these are 2 questions that I as a PM, would ask a founder if I was joining a startup, and you can reverse that and think, as a founder, here's 2 things that you could give your PM or tell your PM about when you're hiring them to inspire them or to help them. First one is context. So don't assume they understand everything that's in your head. As a PM, you should ask for this. Make sure you've got the context that helps you make good decisions. And the PM role doesn't work without this context, right? You can make decisions, but you need some sort of context to help guide and point yourself in a direction that is useful. And really, this is about, are you solving the right problem at that moment? And the problems you solve in the first year of a company are quite different to the ones you solve in the second year. And this is about like what core bits of the business are you building first, more than how do you optimize or polish a particular element of the product. And as the founder, you need to help the PM by giving them that context. So, answer their questions, or better still, just be proactive and make sure they know what's going on in your mind. As a PM, if it's not there or the founder doesn't realize that this is what you need, go and ask for it, because without it, you're going to struggle. Worst case is you make bad decisions. Usually what happens is you just get frustrated and leave. Second one is ensure the culture, or the founder specifically, because in tiny startups, the founder really is the culture. Ensure it's a good fit for you. And as the founder, ensure this person is a good fit for your organization. Do you enable them to do their best work, or are you constantly going to be like grinding with them and frustrating them, or they frustrating you? Do your best to get on the same page as to like what they need and what kind of culture they're going to be successful in. And this one's more subtle. This probably, you can't figure this out when you're hiring them, but you can figure it out in the first 6 months of working with them. Personally, I think these are 2 things that I've learned and I would do now more meticulously than I did when I started out. So hopefully that's useful. And then final one is, this is all about like how you find these people. And when I reflect on the millions of product interviews that I feel like I've done over the past few years, I've literally lost count. But I think one of the things from doing so many interviews is that I feel like I'm pretty good at hiring PMs, but that takes practice. And if you haven't done this before, you haven't done a great deal of this, maybe it's helpful for me to share the one thing that I always fall back on here, which is just sort of bubbled up. I've realized that this is the one thing that really gives me the insight that I'm looking for about, is it a good PM? And if they answer this question well, and you feel excited at the thought of working with them after they've answered it, then they're probably a good hire. So that gut feel thing, maybe, this is like, there's no shortcuts really, but like maybe if there is, this is a shortcut to how to know, like how to get the gut feel of whether someone's a good PM. And it's about just talk about, like, get them to talk about how have they moved a metric. And you can start with this high level and give them the openness to talk about how you moved a metric, but really the things within that you're hoping they tell you about is, what was the problem they were solving? Can they describe it very clearly? And can they describe the person that this problem affects and what it means for them? What did they build? So what's their solution? And you can go as deep as you need to on this, like, get into the nuts and bolts of actually how they build stuff, because going back to my original five things that you look for in a startup PM, you probably do want to know that they're good at building something. And then how do you know it works? So can they measure stuff? Can they actually do the data analysis to be really clear on the impact they've had? And that's the final part of the PM sort of life cycle is, you figure out problems, you build stuff, but do you know if it's worked or not? And it doesn't even matter if it's worked or not, actually. If they've measured it and they've figured out what doesn't work, then that means they're already ahead of someone that hasn't started working on that problem. I've come back to this question so many times now that I think there's something in it. Like it's pretty direct, and there's not really anywhere to hide. It's like, have you built something or not? Have you solved a problem or not? Or how do you know you've solved it, or how do you not? How do you know you've not solved it? And I think the answers that you get from this are usually really colourful, and it gives people the room to bring their personality and their opinions and their experience into the interview, which are things that give you some of those feedbacks around culture and fit with the person. So that's it. I hope I've stuck to time. I lost my counter halfway through. Thank you very much for listening. Hopefully that was useful, and please fire any questions at me in the chat channel, and I will stay online for a bit. I think there's a Q&A, so hopefully I can pick up anything else there, but you can email me as well if you really want to chat to me. I usually respond pretty quickly. Thank you.
Sharon, thank you so much. That was a fantastic presentation. Oh, we actually have some Q&A. We have a question from Karen, who is a speaker later on this week. She asks, "What's your experience hiring PMs from big companies, like Expedia, etc., where the product surface exposure is very limited to a narrow scope? Have you ever seen this work out in a startup context?"
So there's always exceptions, but oftentimes, no, it doesn't work. So there's always exceptions, but I think if you're trying to streamline and hire someone as quickly as you possibly can, this might be a way to focus your efforts by saying, no, I'm not going to look at people from those organizations. I'm very hesitant to say that because I am a big advocate of diverse teams and not having people be held back by their backgrounds. And I'd like to think that you can maybe give them a chance and use some of the screening techniques that I've just talked about to figure out, actually, have they got the aptitude or the ability to convert.
Yeah.
But the reality is, if they're applying, that's a good signal. If you're proactively going out and looking for them, perhaps don't. The reason being is often, to your point, like they haven't got the depth. They've done a very sort of shallow role, or they've done a very kind of specific part of the product, and they're just going to be missing a bunch of things that you need from them because they haven't got, say, 20 other product managers working with them.
Right. Yeah. And so that actually, I had a question to ask, which is not far from Karen's question, which was one of those something before, like tensions you often find when you're a fast growing startup. So you've hired a couple of people, you've got a product team, maybe not a product team, but you have an engineering team with a product person on it growing, and you now need to make those 5 or 6 hires. Those PMs who come from an Expedia or Facebook or Google background do crop up quite often, especially from agencies, when you're working with agencies to hire people. And I'm a big believer in mentoring. Like there's a mentorship period when you bring any new hire on, especially in a smaller team. And so one of the things that I struggle with, and I don't know what the right answer is here, is those people who are very productive when they have a team to work through. Is it worth mentoring them back to an IC-ish type level, or should you just totally, is that like a lost cause in trying to do that?
I don't think, I'd hope there's never a lost cause. It's more about how much time have you got, and are you able to do it? Are you able to support them? Mm-hmm. And often in startups, you get, as a product manager in startup, you often get people saying, hey, can I be an intern, or can I learn from you? And the reality is often there's just not enough time in the day in order to do it, and you have to say no, right? Product managers always have to say no to stuff and be ruthless when prioritizing. I think, again, it's always judge the individual and judge those some of those signals that I mentioned. It is subtle, and you can correct. Some people do 10 years in a big bank and then come and join a company like Wise, and there's a bit of an adjustment. But if they take feedback well and they're really motivated, and they have some of the core sort of capabilities, like whether it's being good with data or having some base sort of technical understanding, or maybe they had a design course somewhere in their past, then I think they can, for sure.
Cool. Thank you. All right. Well, it's at the top of the hour, so I'm very aware that we have our group discussion starting now. So we can continue this Q&A conversation in there if you have some time. So I'm just going to sort of wrap up the stage now, and then I'll join everybody in the sessions panel in a second. So Sharon, thank you so much. And I'll see you there in a couple minutes. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, everybody, that brings us to the end of day one. This is really sort of serve as the wrap up for the stage, but now myself, Sharon, and I believe Kate as well is going to join us over in the sessions. And you can find the sessions right here-ish, depending on how big your screen is. There. There's a nice little now badge that you can click to join. So I'll see you in there. We have 2 different rooms going, I believe. Please feel free to dive in, join the conversation. It's meant to be open discussion. And if you don't find something that's interesting in one room, do dive out and go to the next one. Don't stay there just because it exists. So thank you so much for joining us for day one. I will see you all back here tomorrow at 3 o'clock London time to kick off our second day of the Product Summit. See you all soon.